too many people I know that I know too much. I am having too much of a positive impact on some and a negative impact on others in the correct way. So he knew that what he was upon, that he was going to be martyred for it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. All praise belongs to Allah, and may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon his final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay, my dear brothers and sisters, MalcolmX. Another character, another individual who again has, I myself have a personal affiliation to, in that he is one of the most influential characters, not only in American history, but in 20th world history. His message, albeit quite contrary to Islamic teachings for the majority of his life, nonetheless we can still take great benefit from the principles, if you like, that he stood for. Now, before I go into some important issues on that, I just want to mention a couple of things. And that is, number one, there is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is narrated by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And it talks about the creation of the janeen, of the baby inside the womb of a mother, and different stages it goes through. And then at the very end part of the hadith, it talks about, either the Prophet informed us that an individual will do the actions of the people of paradise. And then the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue, and then they will change until they are cubits distance away from the paradise because of the actions they've done. But then they change and do the actions of the people of the hellfire. And likewise the opposite, that a person will live their lives doing the acts of the people of the hellfire, and then the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, has always been there, but will decree that that person will then change when they are cubits distance away from the hellfire, that they will begin then doing the actions of the people of paradise. So you may find a person lives a long life, or the majority of their life, doing things which are contrary to Islam, other than Islam. However, al-a'malu bil khawatim, that we judge everything by its ending. We judge everything by its ending. And it was, as we know, that MalcolmX, who is El-Hajj, El-Shabazz, when he performed his Hajj, as he's known now, embraced Islam, embraced Orthodox Sunni Islam before he was martyred, rahimahullah ta'ala. So, just as personally, because each of the presentations that we hear about, we could have chosen anybody, and there are far greater people in history that we could have chosen. However, on a platform like this, where I can only choose a certain amount of people, I wanted to choose people whom I had a passion for concerning their lives, that had a direct impact on my life, and no doubt many millions other than myself. So we have the individual who stood up for the truth in terms of religion, which was particularly important to me, and also an individual who was more than passionate about justice and fairness, and wanting to establish human rights, not civil rights, which he is commonly attributed standing up for the civil rights of people, but rather what he stood for was actually human rights. Now the life of MalcolmX is, and what he stood for, I believe, is something more than important in the life of every Muslim and everyone sitting here now. Why? I believe that because the quote unquote system that we are living in hasn't changed very much. Because what you have is this system that exists, not to call it names or to start pointing fingers, but there is something that wants to be in control, wants to be in control of you, wants to influence your decisions and the way that you think. That exists, whether you like it or not. When you walk into a supermarket, and I was just telling this to my children not long ago, about having your own mind and thinking for yourself. That there are very, very few people who are free from that system where that they have the ability to really think for themselves and not to be duped into thinking that this system is the reality and that in fact that you're living in some false world. The moment you step into a supermarket, that there is a battle for your mind and your heart. Really simple matter. I said, in what way? When you go down a particular aisle and you see all these fizzy drinks, and there's a number of different fizzy drinks you can buy. There's the white fizzy drink, there's the black fizzy drink, there's the orange fizzy drink, all different fizzy drinks. However, for some reason, the black fizzy drink is taken up, 2/3 of that or 3/4 of the aisle is taken up by one company or just two companies. And even the supermarket, it's their shop, it's their product, they'll have a tiny little bit selling their own product. They're actually promoting a larger company for whatever reason. So when you want to buy a fizzy drink, there is a company that wants you to buy their product. They want to influence you and they want to have that impact on you. Now this may seem not that important, but the principle is there. That the moment you step out of your house, the moment you step into a shop, from the clothes that you buy, from the food that you eat, there is something or people, corporations, trying to influence and control the way that you think. But the religion, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is something which will give you the tools to free yourself from that. If you look very carefully to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this worldly life as a deception, something that's not real, if you want to use the word virtual, many of us, our lives is virtual. Our relationships, the contacts that we have, it's all virtual. It's not real. If you have social media, that's virtual. That's not really real. All those friends and likes, what is that? How do you feel when you get a like? Or how many friends you have and you check it on a daily basis, how many people have I increased by? What is this self that I'm being driven into or sucked into? It is a system. MalcolmX, rahimahullah, was one of those people who stepped out of that and wasn't prepared to just sit by and accept a system to exist and oppress and suppress and restrict people. Yes, he was a member of the Nation of Islam. This is something that, of course, falls out of Orthodox Islam. Because Islam, by its very nature, is universal. It doesn't talk and address an ethnicity or a particular people. If it was, it would be for the Arabs. But it is not. It is a universal religion. So by default, this way of thinking casts it out of the fold of Islam, Orthodox Islam. Now, for the majority of his practicing life, as a religious person, if you like, it was with the Nation of Islam. But what stages did he go through for him to reach that? Even though he went through a system which, for the vast majority of people, when they fall into it, they never ever come out of it. Okay, so he was born in 1925, where there was racism was rife in the southern parts of America. His father was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. His mother, shortly after that, had a nervous breakdown. All of his siblings were put into care. He then was, after that of care, he had the ability to live with his sister in Boston. And then after that, he got involved in the most evil of crimes you can imagine. Most evil of crimes, drugs, pimping, alcohol, always involved in all of that. And then, naturally, if a person takes that path in life, they fall into the hands of the law, and he was imprisoned. While in prison, he met a person who was a member of the Nation of Islam, and he was affected by that. He was told to give up all of these vices, all these evils, because there was something in him, because he wasn't satisfied with the life that he had before. He'd seen everything, tasted everything. This is not how to live. He was shown, this is what is happening. You need to step out of that and don't be affected by that. There are greater goals, greater things that we need to achieve as human beings. So he embraced the nation of Islam and eventually became a minister, became the highest minister in the nation of Islam in a very short time. Please bear in mind that he was assassinated at the age of 39. Very, very young. And, Islamically, we see that when a person reaches the age of 40, that their intellect becomes, complete, and then their life really, if you like, can start on a different level. As we know that our beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was chosen as a Nabi at the age of 40. He didn't reach that. But what he achieved, what he was able to achieve by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is truly amazing. A person, again, never went through a formal education, but rather was self-taught. There was something within him about wanting to stand for justice and fairness, which ultimately, if that is within a person, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, will lead them to Islam. Because there is only one system, one way of life that truly implements justice and fairness. For the simple fact that implementing justice and fairness is taken out of your hands, and my hands. If justice was only left with you and I, we would abuse it. But the understanding of justice and fairness is from who? It is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where we get the true understanding of fairness and justice. And even more on top of that, there are certain issues which are completely taken away from mankind. You don't have the right to talk about that at all. Things like inheritance. When a person passes away and they leave their estate behind, it's not for us to start arguing who's going to take it. It is not for that deceased when he writes his or writes her will that you're getting this, you didn't visit me so often, so you're not getting it. That's taken away from you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that justice will be served when you pass away, in that this is how it is going to be distributed. That you don't have the right to oppress or be unfair to anyone. So the only possible way, and I guess this is an opinion, and it is my opinion, and it is an opinion that I'm willing to die upon because I chose that way of life. Like you have that opportunity to make a choice what system, what way that you're going to live, but you choose to live as a Muslim. You're willing to die by this system, that this is the real way to live, to establish justice in your life, for yourselves and for others. This is the way to live. So MalcolmX, rahimahullah ta'ala, went through an evolution. It didn't happen overnight, but was an extremely intelligent individual. Extremely intelligent. You only have to just go to MalcolmX quotes, for example, on the internet, and you'll see the amazing richness of quotes. He was a person beyond his time. And you find certain people in history like this, that maybe myself, when I speak for the time now, and maybe in 10 years' time, what I speak about is irrelevant. You find another person, they speak about things, and it's only for that time. The greatest example of that is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us and speaks to all people at all times, in all places, in every era, and it's applicable because that's the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows that to be with certain individuals, that they can speak and that they can, even though subhanAllah it is upon misguidance of how they're living their lives, but the principles and the justice that they're looking for can be found and implemented generations later. And how similar the things that he said in the 1950s and 60s that maybe you and I as Muslims, we can relate to. You just have to change one word in the things that he is saying. And that's not for you to say that I'm a victim and Muslims should be victims. Because never as a Muslim you should feel as a victim. Because as a victim, you're looking for some sympathy from somebody. Muslims, we don't want sympathy. Muslims shouldn't look for sympathy. You look to feel sorry for yourself. We're in a very bad situation. Look at the weakness here. Look at the killing here and the starving here. And sometimes you meet a brother or sister, how are you? I'm terrible, I'm not feeling so good today. Somehow that person is happy to say things like that because they'll get some sympathy from the person. Oh, subhanAllah, may Allah make it easy for you. The dua is good, of course. The dua is good from that person, but somehow you feel comfortable feeling the victim. Oh, you're always ill. Yeah, I know, I'm always ill. It's really bad, you know. Miskeen ana. I'm a real, weak person. This is not how we should be. You won't ever make any progress like that. The things that are going on, we look internally at ourselves and you need to make a change. This is exactly what MalcolmX did, and he died for it. Even when he was giving one of the last interviews, the commentator was speaking with him and saying, because he just returned from the Hajj, the pilgrimage, when he was able to see the browns, the yellows, the whites, the reds, different types of people, and realized that Islam was indeed universal. He sat there because he had left the nation of Islam and exposed some of the ongoings through the nation of Islam. He said, are you not afraid about what may happen to you? He replied, he said, I'm already dead. I'm already dead. There's too many people I know that I know too much. I'm having too much of a positive impact on some and a negative impact on others in the correct way. So he knew that what he was upon, that he was going to be martyred for it. Now, as a Muslim, when you have these challenges in the system that we are living in, there are too many Muslims willing to just sit there idly and watch things go by. Let their life just go on without wanting to make a change. They realize there are mistakes, they realize there are things that need to be changed, but for some reason that they have been, if you can say, it's a kind of humiliation, that you recognize the mistake and the weakness, but you sit there as a passenger, or you sit there like you're in the cinema watching things happen to people. This is a dhul. This is a humiliation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that individual. It is without any doubt part of our belief that Islam will prevail, with or without you. Now, if you know that, why would you then make a conscious decision to say, I'm just going to sit back and somehow have some hope that because I said I'm a Muslim, la ilaha illallah, I didn't do anything for the ummah, and that suddenly I'm going to reap the great prize, the booty. When it comes out in the end, I want to be rubbing my hands and say, right, which portion is mine? There are people who will be deserving of that fawz, of that honoring by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the position that they took. And these people are not the majority. These people are not the majority. They are a minority. But these people, they stand out. Here it is, we're talking about somebody who died 50, 60 years ago. And only for the past, or the last 3, 4, maybe 5 months of his life, that he actually was a Muslim. Before that was from the worst of people you can imagine. Only then to take a path which to some extent improved, but still was a form of misguidance. Only then to find the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then make that positive change. What positive change am I making? And where do I fit in this system? Maybe I don't believe in the system, brother, you know, what are you talking about? What system? I go to work, I have a family, I need to pay bills. Of course, we all do. But the reality is that if you have that mentality, that you are subdued, you're not really doing very much, it's likely, wallahu a'lam, that your kids are going to inherit that from you as well. Your kids will inherit that as well. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will honor them to take them out of that, but maybe they will just take from the parents the attitude that you had. It is very important that when we look at ourselves, that we take ourselves seriously. We take ourselves very seriously, and that living here in this worldly life is a very, very short time and will have an impact on eternity for you. If you can imagine, there is this long rope, and at the very edge of that, or the beginning of the rope, it is, I just saw this a few days, a good example actually, that it's colored red. And that's your existence in this worldly life. And then the rope just continues for eternity. That tiny little existence you have in this worldly life will have an impact on your eternity. Look at the statements very carefully of Malcolm X, what he stood for, what he lived for, even though he was prepared to give his life for it. Now, I'm not saying that you have to give your life for it. It is likely, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that your life's not going to be under threat. If you decide to practice your Islam, understand your Islam in the correct way. But as Malcolm X, and the very famous many statements that he had, is that he was going to achieve what he wanted to achieve by any means necessary. Very famous statement that he had. Look at the speeches that he had. When he was invited to the Oxford Union here in the UK, he put himself and explained himself as an extremist. They were the words that he used. He said, I'm an extremist. I am. Because that's what he was accused of. But he gave context to that, what he was talking about. And that's how easy it is. Give context to everything that is happening. Don't allow this deviation or this demonization of the way that you live to be concentrated and unchallenged. So he said, I'm an extremist at the Oxford Union, and he argued for and put his position that he was an extremist, that he was willing to go all out to prove or to establish and make sure that people had human rights. If that makes him an extremist, then he was willing to accept that. So if you're an extremist, what are you an extremist for? What do you hold close to your heart, and what do you stand for? Because, as he said, that if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. If you stand for nothing, you don't have very much to stand for. What are your beliefs? Who are you? Then you'll just fall for anything. It is very important for us as Muslims that we look at these people and see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them have a positive impact on mankind, not just the civil rights movement. Don't belittle what he put forth for people. It wasn't a civil rights. It was more than that. He wanted to stand for human rights. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided him at the very end of his life, that we can say that his fight, his sacrifice was, even though many years before that was in the wrong place, can still be used to say this is an individual who wasn't willing just to go with the system, but was willing to step out of that and try to make a positive change. Your role in that will differ from the person sitting next to you. No doubt it will differ. But you have to find your role. You have to show yourself, show your families, this is what we are supposed to be doing. If you don't have that mindset, if you're just willing to be one of the masses, then there will only be regret for you when you meet your Lord. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the greatest example for us in this. Wasn't willing to live in an Arabian society where everybody pretty much committed shirk, and this was their status quo. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him to deliver a message. And on that day of Arafah, where 100,000 companions stood there listening to every letter, every breath, every footstep that he ﷺ took, stood there in front of them and said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have I not delivered the message to these people? This was his job, alayhi salatu wasalam. He was aware of it, he was informed of that. وَاعْبُدُ اللَّهَ وَاعْبُدُ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. That you are to worship your Lord until the certainty comes to you. That's all that is required of you. To your dying moment, worship your Lord and know your purpose in life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us steadfast in all that we do. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.